Hello everyone, this is Rig. Welcome to an episode on French Revolution. In this episode, we will discuss in detail about all the aspects of French Revolution, how did it happen, what were the points of outbreak of the France people, and what was the impact of French Revolution. Hope you like the video and please carry a notebook with you so that you can note down the important points. Also, the last part of this video will have questions and answers which will not only help you in your exams but will also help you to understand this chapter in a better way. This is an interactive class, so if you want, or I will be very happy to answer your questions which you will post in comments. So please go, let's go on to this video, and this video is tailored according to the ICSE syllabus of class 8. However, anyone interested in this topic can go through the video. So let's begin. French Revolution. Introduction. Change in government system. So in the late 17th century, certain political developments led to the change of a system of government in England. So there is a country, England, we all know about it. They ruled us for almost 200 years. So in England, still if you see, there is a king, there is monarchy, but monarchy is not that powerful. It is like an honorary position. So monarchy is there, but king is not controlling everything of the government. So that change in political system happened in the late 17th century in England, and that was called constitutional monarchy. Under the new system known as the constitutional monarchy, the monarch ruled with the consent of the parliament, the representative body of people. So the monarch or the king was under the governance of the parliament, and the parliament decided everything, and king was just the head representative of the nation. That was constitutional monarchy. The monarch no longer enjoyed unlimited power. So the monarch or the king or queen, whoever there is, the ruler of the state, that person did not particularly enjoy uninterrupted power. They had some limitations. They had to function under the observations or limitations which will be set by the parliament. Rise of democratic ideals. In the 18th century, philosophers began to promote individuals' freedom and political independence. So all the philosophers during the 18th century, they started to promote individuals' freedom. Means everyone has the right to freedom, and political independence means you can have your political opinion. Thinkers like John Locke, Rousseau, Voltaire, Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Paine wrote about individual rights, which later on formed the basis of fundamental rights. So there were thinkers like John Locke, Rousseau, Voltaire, Thomas Jefferson. These were all famous philosophers of the time who suggested the thoughts of individual rights. They wrote against the injustice and promoted the right to political independence. So they wrote against whatever wrong was happening to the people of the state, and they promoted the right to political independence. Means you can have your own political opinion. Their writings spread democratic ideals widely. So it is through their writings that the principles of democracy spread all over the world. These ideas influenced political changes in America and France in the late 18th century. So all these ideas inspired the people to think about democracy, to think about political independence and individual rights. And the effect was seen in the political system of America and France. And all of it happened in the late 18th century. Now, what is French Revolution? Why did it happen? Here we will go through an introduction. So, the French Revolution is regarded as one of the greatest landmarks of European history. So, this is one of the most significant event in European history and also in world history. It had far-reaching worldwide effects. The effects of French Revolution was not restricted to the country of France only. Its effect reached even up to India. We will discuss all those things later. So it began in 1789 and lasted till 1799. So this French Revolution began in 1789 and it went on for 10 years and ended in 1799. It began as an attempt to create a constitutional monarchy. So the constitutional monarchy which existed in England was taken as a role model by the people of France, and the people of France wanted to create a constitutional monarchy in their own state in the same way as it had been existing in England. So it soon became a movement to establish a republic by overthrowing the monarchy. So later on, it became a movement, and after some time, the aim of establishing the constitutional monarchy vanished, and people were directly advocating for democratic republic. Liberty, equality, and fraternity were the three ideals of French Revolution. So these were the three bases of French Revolution. That is liberty, equality, and fraternity. Liberty means political independence and independence in thoughts and lifestyle of people. Equality means everyone will be treated as equal by the government, and fraternity means a feeling of brotherhood or a feeling of familiarity will exist between the people of a nation. These ideals had lasting impact on human civilization. So with these ideals there was a long term impact on human civilization. The revolution was a significant struggle for people's rights and justice. So this revolution was very much of an important struggle where people fought for their rights and protested against the injustice. Political cause. What were the political causes of the French Revolution? The Bourbon dynasty had ruled over France since the late 15th century. So there was a dynasty which was ruling over France since the late 15th century, and that dynasty was the Bourbon dynasty. The kings of the dynasty were absolute monarchs. So the kings of Bourbon dynasty were the ultimate rulers of the French people. That means they were the absolute monarchs. No one was above them. They believed they were answerable to God alone for their actions. So whatever they will do, they are not answerable to anyone. They are answerable only to God for their actions. They were not accountable to the common people. So whatever they feel, they may do it. However, they are not answerable to the common people. At the time of French Revolution, Louis XVI was the king. So at the time of when the people protested, that time Louis XVI was the king of France. Louis XVI was a very weak ruler. He was no way capable of managing the government of France. So he was considered to be the weakest ruler of the French people, and he was also the last ruler eventually. So there was no check in his power by any parliament. So what used to happen in England? There was a king, but king was not the absolute power. People had say over the policies of the government. People could restrict the king's power with the help of parliamentary control. That was not there in France. In France, there was no check on the king's power. The king could do whatever he wanted. The administration had become corrupt and inefficient. So the administration had become corrupt and totally inefficient. The king used power for selfish ends, neglected the welfare of the people. So the king used his power for his own needs and neglected all kinds of facilities which he was supposed to give to the people. Social cause. What are the social causes of the French Revolution? Social causes of the French Revolution mean that what were the problems in the society which angered the people? Why were the people against the king, and what were the social reasons behind it? So the French society was divided into three estates or orders. So there were three divisions in the French society. People lived in three status level, and those were very much distinct from each other. The first estate included the clergy, and the second estate the nobility. So the first estate included the clergy people, and second estate had mainly the family members of the king who belonged to the class of noble people or nobility. The third estate, all the other people were there, that is for the commoners, businessmen, merchants, court officials, lawyers, peasants, landless laborers, everyone else were there in the third estate. So three social levels were there. First estate was for the clergy people, second estate were for the nobility, and third estate were for the common people. The society followed the maxim, the nobles fight, the clergy pray, and the people pay. So the first estate's duty or the clergy's duty was to pray for the state, and the second estate's duty was to fight for the state, and the third estates were the victims, that is their duty was only to pay for the expenses of the first two estates. The first and the second estates comprised only 10%. The third estate comprised 90%. So only 10% of the people were there in the first two estates, whereas the other people, the other 90%, were there in the third estate. The first two estates enjoyed privileges and owned landed property. So most of the properties, even though they were 10%, 90% of the French properties were there within the 10% of the people. That was uh, how unfair the system was during the time of French Revolution. So first two estates enjoyed a lot of privileges. Nobility and clergy were exempted from taxes. The first two estates did not even have to pay any kind of tax. So they were the richest people in the society, but they did not need to pay any kinds of tax. The third estate bore the burden of taxation and worked without rights. So all the money, all the earning of the state was from the third estate. So the burden of taxation was on the third estate, and they worked hard. They did not even have any kind of freedom. So that was how the social differences existed in the French society. And as you can understand, the people will not like it. So there was much discontent among the people of the third estate. And third estate had 90% of the French population. So 90% of the French population are not liking whatever is happening to their society. Economic cause. Now there were some problems related to money also, and those come under the economic causes. So the French government was heavily under debt. The French government did not have any money, and they owed a lot of money to the people, mainly the third estate. Now when I say that a government is under debt, that does not mean that the government has taken money from some other government. No, it does not mean like that. If the French government is under debt, that does not mean France has taken money from some other state. No, it means that French government have taken a lot of money from the people of France, and they should not have done that. So French government was heavily under debt. Debt means money owed to the people of France. The king used the state treasury funds to lead a luxurious life. However, the people were not having food, but the king was leading a very luxurious life. That was the problem. Lavish spending deepened the financial crisis. So the king spent a lot of money and that caused problem that deepened the financial crisis. French involvement in useless wars against England worsened the situation, and there was a ego clash between French government and government of England. So they always used to fight wars with each other because of silly reasons. So it was like the French king liked a queen of some liked a princess of some other country. Same princess is also liked by the prince of England. So now the French and England government are fighting wars with each other. Such useless things used to happen during the late 18th century, and lot of money and resources were used up in these useless wars. The policy of exempting the rich from taxes caused further issues. However, the earning of the French government was also less because the people who had money, they were not paying any tax. The first two estates were not paying any tax. The state treasury could never be filled due to tax exemptions for the wealthy. So the state treasury, or the wealth of the state, the government treasury, could never be filled because the rich people did not pay any money. The wealthy people did not pay tax. Who were paying taxes? The poor people who did not actually have any money. France faced bankruptcy and economic hardship before the revolution. So, before the revolution, France was bankrupt and there was a lot of economic problem for the people. Mainly, third estate faced all these problems. Role of philosophers. Now there were great thinkers in France and also in other parts of Europe and America at that point of time. So they played an important part in making the people understand that they are victims of injustice. So that was the role of philosophers. They inspired the people to fight against injustice. Philosophical base. The intellectual base for revolution was provided by the philosophers. So the intellectual base, the thinking base, to make the people think about the problems, that was done by the philosophers. Locke, Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Voltaire were prominent contributors. So these were famous philosophers of the time who contributed a lot in making the people understand the problems of the society. Locke's theory of limited government inspired the French. So Locke's theory of limited government aimed at restricting the powers of king, the autocracy of king or queen or whoever is the head of the government. Locke aimed to limit the powers of the government. So Locke means Locke limited. He locked the powers, he locked the undisputed powers of the French monarch. So that is how you may remember. Locke means locked the powers of the French monarchy. So Montesquieu promoted the theory of separation of powers. Now you are in class 8, so you can understand what is separation of powers. The functioning of government has been divided into three parts, that is legislative, the people who make laws. There is executive, means the people who execute those laws, and then there is judiciary, who sees to that the laws are implemented correctly in the society. So these are three branches of the government, and that theory, the concept that the functioning of the government will be divided into three parts, that theory was proposed by a person named Montesquieu. Rousseau's social contract theory was the key inspiration, and social contract theory is a theory which tries to find how state has been formed. And in his social contract theory, Rousseau has stated that there must be a communication between the managers and the stakeholders. So the people of the state and the king or queen or the government must have proper dealings, contracts, or communications with each other before taking any kind of decision. Rousseau said that man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chain. So this was a famous dialogue by Rousseau, and he said that even if we are born free, but we are in chains everywhere, means our freedom is always restricted. That is to say, there is no freedom at all. The middle class was inspired by the revolutionary ideals. So the middle class was very much inspired with all these ideas which were given by the philosophers. The ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity, and popular sovereignty spread. Popular sovereignty is uh, popular sovereignty means that the ultimate power, the final power rested in the hands of the population. The word popular comes from population. So the people of the state had the final power. That and final power means sovereignty. So final power of the country rested in the hands of the population or people. That is popular sovereignty. These inspired people to revolt and fight for their rights. So, all these things inspired the people to fight against the injustice. American War of Independence. Now, there was a war of independence in America that also provided inspiration to the French people to fight against the injustices. The French were inspired by the American War of Independence. In my next video of class 8, I intend to make a video on the American War of Independence. So stay tuned until then. But for now, you must know that before the French Revolution, there was the American War of Independence, where the American people fought for their independence against the British government. Many French soldiers and generals took part in the war. So many people from France went to America to fight against the Britishers. They returned to France with revolutionary ideas. So when they came back to France, they had a lot of innovative ideas. They inspired people to fight against the despotic and unjust government. So, thus, they got the motivation to fight against the unjust government of France. The success of American Revolution encouraged the French. The revolutionaries' triumph enthused the people of France. So, with the triumph, with the victory of the American revolutionaries, the French people became motivated. The American example encouraged the French to rebel for their rights. So, they took the American Revolution, the French people took the American Revolution to be a role model for their struggle against the injustices by the French government. Now we will see what was the outbreak of all these causes. So the first thing that happened was the Estates General. Now what is Estates General? Meeting in May 1789. In May 1789, Louis XVI's need for money forced him to call a meeting of the Estates General. So Louis XVI was in scarcity of money, and so he called up a meeting of all the estates. Means representatives of the estates will come together. There were three estates. The first two were the privileged estates, and the suffering estate was the third estate. So all the estate people will come, representatives will come, and they will decide something to do regarding Louis XVI's need for money. The Estates General was the old feudal assembly summoned to obtain consent for new loans and taxes. So this was an old system, old during the time of feudal ages. When feudalism existed in Europe, feudalism was still in existence during the time of French Revolution, but it was a very old practice, and the Estates General was a system in which the government, when they needed new loans or they tried to implement new taxes, they had to call the representatives of estates and take their opinion. The third estate demanded equality in taxation and abolition of privileges. So the third estate said that we will pay tax only on the basis of income. So people who are earning more, that is the first estate and the second estate, they will have to pay more tax. We are earning less, we will pay less tax. So it was like a percentage of your income will go to tax. That was the fair demand by the third estate. When their proposal was denied, the third estate walked out in protest. So when the king refused their proposal, the proposal of the third estate went out of the estates general, went out of the meeting. They walked out in protest. This act of walking out marked a significant step in the beginning of the French Revolution. So, with this act of walking out, the French Revolution is said to have started. The financial crisis faced by Louis XVI played a key role in initiating revolutionary actions. So, this financial crisis, which was faced by Louis XVI, because of this reason, this is one of the main reason for the revolutionary activities of the French people. This protest was an early sign of unrest and mobilization against the absolute rule. Mobilization means now people are doing something in practicality. They are doing some practical thing to protest against the French government, that is the government of Louis XVI. Outbreak, tennis court pledge. So what is tennis court pledge and what happened in that time? So on June 20, 1789, representatives of the Third Estate gathered in the Royal Indoor Tennis Court at Versailles. So Versailles was a great palace which was built by Louis XIV. Now the Third Estate people are wanting to protest, but they need to conduct a meeting. Where will they do it? They need a place to do a meeting. So there was an indoor tennis court at the palace of Versailles. It was in that place that they all gathered together and decided to formally start the French Revolution. They declared themselves as the National Assembly. So the Third Estate declared that we are the National Assembly. The members took oath that they would not disband or return home until a new constitution was drafted. So they needed a new constitution which will have equal rules and laws for everyone. And they intended to make that new constitution, and they took a promise, they took a oath that until this new constitution is made, we will not break out and go home. So until this new constitution is made, we will fight for our struggles. This historic oath became known as the Tennis Court Pledge. So, this taking of oath by the members of Third Estate that a new constitution will be drafted, this oath taking ceremony is called as the Tennis Court Pledge. The pledge aimed at limiting the powers of the king. With this pledge, they tried to restrict the powers of the king. So the king could not do whatever he wanted anymore. It marked the beginning of an organized movement to draft a constitution. So, thus, the members of Third Estates organized themselves and finally started to protest against the French government in order to draft a new constitution. The tennis court pledge was the turning point towards establishing a constitutional government, form the monarchical government. Now, what is Bastille Day? What happened in the Bastille Day? Louis XVI ordered the movement of troops into Paris. So, when people were protesting to draft a new constitution which will limit the powers of the king will obviously not like it very much. So, in order to fight against the protesters, Louis XVI said that army should go into Paris and arrest the protesters. And that was how he ordered the movement of troops into Paris. This led the mob in Paris to openly revolt against the king. So the Paris mob became furious that first of all, the king is very weak. The king is doing a lot of injustice to the people of France. And when the people are saying something, that time the king is sending army. So this angered the mob in such a way that they openly started to revolt against the king. On 14 July 1789, they stormed into the prison of Bastille. So, Bastille was a fort which acted as a prison, and all the people, all the protesters stormed into Bastille and released the prisoners. The fortress was a symbol of despotism and stored ammunition. So there was a lot of ammunition in the fortress also, and this was seen as a sign of despotism, means a sign of injustice, a symbol of injustice which was being done by the king. So this fortress was a symbol of despotism. The mob released prisoners and joined revolutionaries. So the angry mob went forward, they destroyed the gates of the Bastille fort and they released all the prisoners. This storming symbolized the victory of the people of France and fall of monarchy. So this was the period, this was the day in which the monarchy of France fell down, and this was seen as a victory of the people, mainly people of the third estate. It marked the beginning of the revolution. So this was how the violent phase of revolution began. France celebrates this event every year as Bastille Day. So every year on 14 July, even today, French people celebrate this day as Bastille Day, and it is almost celebrated as an Independence Day. Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Now, what is meant by the fact Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen? The National Assembly was formed as we have discussed before, and the aim of National Assembly was to make a constitutional government, was to make a constitution where everyone will be given equal rights. So the National Assembly with the third estate representatives took control of France's affairs. So the National Assembly took control over the political functioning of the French people. In August, the Assembly framed the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen as a prologue to the Constitution. So, this will be like an introduction to the Constitution. Like in India, we have the preamble. Here in French Constitution, there will be Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, which will summarize the ideologies of the Constitution. So, it will be a prologue of the Constitution. It listed rights such as right to life, freedom of speech, equality before law, and right to property. So here right to life means a person cannot be killed by the government without fair trial. So many times a person was arrested and the king, without seeing whether the person is guilty or not, he would hang that person or he would kill that person. That cannot be done. Fair trial needs to happen, and that was the right to life, means you have the control over your own life. There was freedom of speech, you can understand this very well. There was equality before law, means law will treat every people as equal, and there was right to property, means people had the right to own properties. The constitution was completed by 1791. So by 1791, the final constitution was written down. Louis XVI and the Queen Mary Antoinette. The name of the queen was Mary Antoinette. So Louis XVI and his queen tried to flee to Germany but were captured and publicly executed. So both the king and the queen was publicly executed by the French people. The monarchy was abolished in France, was declared a democratic republic. So the monarchical system of government was gone and France became a democratic republic. Means the power will rest in the hands of the people and representatives of people will govern over the country. The revolution continued in phases until Napoleon became the emperor. So until 1799, the revolution continued, and when Napoleon became the emperor, that was the time when revolution finally ended. Napoleon's code shaped French society based on equality before law, religious tolerance, and private property security. So about Napoleon's Code were a list of rules which all people followed. So that was Napoleon's Code. And later on, when we will publish a video on Napoleon himself, that time we will discuss this in great detail. So please follow that video also. Post revolution period, what happened after the revolution? New models of government. So monarchy was gone. There was a contrast between representative government and authoritarianism seen during the periods of terror and Napoleon. So after French revolution, there was representative government, means representations of all people, representatives of all people who were selected based on elections. They, it was much like parliament. So parliament has a representative structure, means representatives of the people selected through votes will decide on how the country will be run, and that led to sometimes authoritarianism. Authoritarianism means the leader of the representative government will become just like the king, which is very wrong. But sometimes it was seen during the periods of terror. Periods of terror mean the period in which Robespierre ruled over the French people and he hanged everyone who was opposing him. So this was the period of terror. And during the time of Napoleon also, the power of parliament was almost gone and Napoleon again became the despotic king of the French people. Stronger centralized state. A stronger and more centralized state emerged with a larger, more effective, and more inclusive administration. So there was more power given to the center, and the center consisted of people from all sections of the society. Thus, it was more effective. Abolition of fiscal privileges, special fiscal privileges, and dues owed by the peasants to lords were abolished. So the peasants sometimes took loans from the lords, and those loans were abolished. So the peasants did not owe money to anyone anymore. And the special privileges in the finance sectors, which the members of first two estates got, they were also abolished. Those privileges were abolished, means now everyone needed to pay tax equally. Internal tariffs were removed and a uniform tax system was established. So internal movement of goods required to be taxed. So those taxations were removed and everyone was under the uniform tax system based on principles of one's income. So according to your income, you will have to pay tax. New civil rights were created and extended, including equality before law. So people had fundamental rights, that is civil rights, and everyone was equal before the law. Careers were open to talent rather than hereditary. So your birth family or your hereditary did not matter. If you are talented, you will get opportunity. So merit was given prevalence rather than hereditary quotas. Participation in elections or government position was based on property qualification. So anyone could participate in election. He may belong from a very humble background, but still he can participate in election. Family lineage did not have anything to do with it. If you are qualified, if you have property, you can act as a representative of the people. Now, what were the socio-economic changes during the French Revolution? A unified commercial code was introduced to standardize economic practices. So, all kinds of businesses had to follow same commercial rule. That was the unified commercial code. Guilds were abolished and workers were granted the rights to organize into unions. So, guilds were abolished means the businessmen could not group together and do something against the workers. That is guild. So everyone could get equal business opportunities. That is why guilds were abolished and workers had certain rights, so they could organize into groups called unions. Business became an honorable profession. So business was seen to be a very dignified and honorable profession. Wealthier peasants acquired land and more peasants became independent proprietors. So wealthier peasants, people who had money, peasants or farmers who had money, they could buy lands. Before, they were not allowed to buy landed properties, and more peasants became independent property owners or proprietors. The bourgeois increased in size. Bourgeois means the middle class, and influenced by acquiring church lands. So church did not have that much of power anymore. So the church lands were owned by the middle class people or the bourgeois, gaining greater wealth and securing positions as government officials and political representatives. So the middle class got a lot of wealth and they could secure positions as political representatives. Changes in ideas and political culture. How did the thought or the ideologies of French people change after the French Revolution? The ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity took hold. Popular sovereignty meant that power rested with people and not the king or aristocracy. We have already discussed this before. Popular sovereignty means ultimate decision making power was in the hand of population. There was a shift towards democratic republicanism, removing narrow ruling groups. So people decided who will be their representatives, and those representatives control the state. That is democratic republicanism. And there all the other factions of the government was removed. Nationalism emerged as a powerful political force. So the devotion of the people lied towards the nation. So nation was the first priority or country was the first priority. That is the feeling of nationalism, and that was the driving political force after the French Revolution. There was a decline in the influence and authority of the church. So church people or the clergy was in the first estate. So when this estate system vanished, when the estate system was abolished, that time there was a decline in the authority of the church. A revolutionary tradition was formed, believing revolution was a path to progressive change and broader popular participation. So people became accustomed to the theme of revolution. From now on, people understood this thing that if there is injustice, we need to conduct a revolution. So that is a revolutionary tradition. Influence outside France. How did the French Revolution impact other portions of the world? Global spread of revolutionary ideas. The revolutionary ideas of the French Revolution spread to all European countries. The slogans of liberty, equality, and fraternity guided freedom loving people worldwide. So, people who loved freedom, to them, role model of ideology was from the French Revolution. And what were the ideologies? They were based on simple ideas like liberty, equality, and fraternity. These simple ideas mattered a lot to the people worldwide. Opposition to hereditary rule. Oppressed people in Europe revolted against the tyrannical and hereditary rulers, establishing systems based on popular sovereignty. So, there was a concept that the king or the monarchical system was not good for the people, and that concept gained motivation or gained fuel after the French Revolution. So, all the other countries of Europe also had their own king and monarchical government. Those kings were hated, and people started to view the French Revolution as a role model to drive away those political powers and to protest against injustice. And thus, everywhere around Europe, people started to form systems based on popular sovereignty. The revolution inspired mass movements globally and ignited the spirit of nationalism among the people. So, all the mass movements all over the world gained a lot of motivation from the French Revolution, and there was a spirit of nationalism, means love for one's own country among the people all over the world. In India also, there was impact of French Revolution. In mid 19th century, liberty, equality, and fraternity influenced India. Thinkers like Raja Rammohn Roy admired these ideals. So, liberty, equality, fraternity, these ideas were taken over by thinkers like Raja Rammohn Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Rani Rashmani. All these people fought for liberty, equality, and fraternity, and they got these ideas mainly from the French Revolution. Indian nationalists embraced these principles and developed a democratic and nationalist outlook. So, Indian nationalists, people who loved their country, they, on the basis of these democratic principles, tried to fight against the British Empire. A national movement for freedom began and led to India's independence from the British rule in 1947. So, based on all these ideas, there was a freedom struggle, and thus we got independent from British rule in 1947. So, that was all about how the French Revolution happened in France, what were the causes, what was the impact of French Revolution, and how did French Revolution affect the ideas all over the world. So that was end of our video on French Revolution. Now we will go through the question and answers. Okay, so someone has asked me what is liberty. Liberty means freedom. Freedom to have or to project your own choices. So you can do whatever you want without hurting others' sentiments. And when there is liberty, when I say freedom, that does not mean you have the freedom to hurt people. No. But within a constitutional guideline, you have freedom. That is called as liberty. You have freedom of thought, you have freedom of speech, you have freedom of religion, you have freedom of forming a family. All these things come under liberty. Okay, so that was all about French Revolution. And now we will go through the question and answers. And if you have any questions, please post it in comments. I will be very much happy to answer, and I will try to answer to the best of my capability. So, beginning with the question and answers. What were the three ideals of the French Revolution? Liberty, equality, and fraternity, the three ideals of the French Revolution, had an everlasting impact on human civilization. These revolutionary ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity, and popular sovereignty greatly inspired the people to revolt and fight for their rights. These principles continue to inspire the functioning of governments in various parts of the world. Discuss briefly the political causes of French Revolution. The Bourbon dynasty had ruled over France since the late 15th century. The kings of the dynasty were absolute monarchs. At the time of French Revolution, people were fed up with the autocratic rule of Louis XVI, who was a weak ruler. There was no check on his power by any parliament. The king used his power for his own selfish ends. How was the social structure of France responsible for bringing about revolution? The French society was divided into three estates or orders. The third estate, which comprised about 90% of the population, was placed lowest in the order of the estates. The first two estates enjoyed privileges and were exempted from payment of taxes. The third estate had to bear the burden of taxation. There was a lot of discontent in the minds of people of the third estate. Under what circumstances did the third estate proclaim itself the National Assembly? In May 1789, Louis XVI's need for money compelled him to convene a meeting of the Estates General. The Third Estate demanded equality in taxation and abolition of privileges. Upon denial of their proposal, the Third Estate walked out in protest. On 20 June 1789, they assembled at Versailles and declared themselves as the National Assembly, pledging not to disband until a new constitution was drafted. Discuss the influence of French Revolution outside France. The revolutionary ideas of French Revolution spread to all European countries. Oppressed people in Europe rose in revolt against the tyrannical hereditary rulers. It inspired mass movements and instilled the spirit of nationalism. In the middle of 19th century, the principles of liberty, equality and fraternity had an impact on India. Indian nationalists imbibed these principles and developed a democratic and nationalist outlook. So that was all about the French Revolution. Hope you have liked the video, and if you have any doubts, this video will be available in the playlist of class 8. So if you have any doubts, you can write it in comments and I will try my best to answer. Thank you so much for your love and support. Someone had asked me what is liberty. I hope the doubt is clear. And if you have any further doubts, you are welcome to ask me anytime. Thank you for your support, and I will continue to do live classes, so please watch it. Anyone who is an aspirant in any competitive exams in GS paper, these videos will help you a lot. So thank you once again.